Now you will hear a brief retelling of the film Godzilla. Revival of pleasant viewing. In Tokyo Bay by rescuers, a pleasure boat was discovered. But there was not a single person on board. At the same time, there was a strong explosion, because of which the highway in the tunnel was flooded with water, mixed with blood. In government assumes that it's all about the volcano, because a huge cloud of steam comes out of the water. All people were evacuated from the coast. After a while, a roar was heard in the tunnel, and eyewitnesses filmed something, what was moving in the cloud of steam. Ministers are still guessing what could have caused the disaster. Submarine and volcano were excluded. At the meeting, Yoguchi put forward a version about a giant sea creature with body temperature over 100 C. But he was quickly shut up and asked not to talk nonsense. However, reporters immediately filmed either a huge tail, either tentacles, which appeared from the water. The ministers tensed up and began to work hard. The simplest solution is to do nothing and see what happens. They want to catch the monster. Others launch a couple of torpedoes and send it to the bottom. And meanwhile, the creature began to rise up the river, simultaneously destroying the port infrastructure. Experts hoped that when trying to land, the fin-like legs will simply break under the weight of the monster, but optimistic expectations were not met again. 120-meter creature with bulging dead eyes. The threatening one moves towards the fleeing crowd. It is forced to crawl due to underdeveloped limbs, and there is constant bleeding from the gills. Apparently, the monster is trying to adapt to life on land. He moves along the road between houses at a speed of 13 kilometers per hour. It will not be possible to eliminate the creature. To densely populated area everything. What can you do now? This is to evacuate the entire population of the city. As soon as possible, the monster clears its path with its snout, turning cars and houses into a pile of junk. It even climbed onto one of the high-rise buildings, and the building immediately collapsed. Under the weight of the splinter, the city is gradually turning into ruins. Prime Minister declared a state of emergency in the country and mobilization of self-defense forces for the first time since World War II. The main military force will be attack helicopters. At some point, the creature raised its head up and underdeveloped paws and crashed onto asphalt with a bang. Then it froze. But the transformation does not take long. The monster stood on its hind legs and shaped forward, already in a vertical position. Huge movable tail causes additional damage, and the total length of the creation increased to 170 meters. The helicopters just arrived and were ready to open fire on him, but that order was cancelled due to the risk to civilian lives. Never met any resistance. The creature rammed the house and went back to the bay. People will be safe for a while. Now we need to restore the city after huge damage. Who struck the monster? It just moved for 2 hours. Listen. And here is the result. Fleet combing the bay to find out, where did the monster lie? The military plans its actions in case if she comes ashore again. And I'm Gucci, assembled an alternative team of different experts who will look for ways to confront the monster. Signs of intelligence in the creature are not recorded. Organic waste is immediately burned due to the stench. It doesn't eat anything. So where does such a huge amount of energy come from? For movement. Nuclear reaction, Ms. Goshira suggested. And indeed, The monster is observed along the entire route. Increased level. Radiation. Iguchi met the envoy of the US President, Kyokan Patterson, and suggested, first of all, find a person who predicted the appearance of a monster. Just a few years ago, it was his boat that was then discovered in the bay. In the documents found, the creature was called Godzilla. On Oda Island, where she came from, this is what they called the incarnation of God. Very evil God. Judging by Goromoki research, it's all my fault. We do not control the dumping of radioactive waste. Latest, some prehistoric creature tried them for 60 years. Because of this, it began to mutate rapidly. On the land, it was freely transformed from a marine organism into amphibian. Godzilla's genetic code is 8 times longer than a person. This is the most perfect creature on the planet. But all that can be said about him now. It's finally moving. One of the specialists understood. Why did the monster return to the bay? It has something like a nuclear reactor inside it. So he needed to cool his body after the mutation. If they can somehow turn off the cooling process, then the monster will either stop or die. It was decided to pump a drug into Godzilla. Blood clotting. Suddenly a cult formed around Godzilla, who calls the monster his god and demands to save him. Soon Godzilla surfaced in another bay and headed towards the shore. Residents watch in horror at the huge tail sweeping through the sky. A living mountain does not notice obstacles in front of it and just walks through the city. Godzilla mutated for the 4th time and doubled in size. Now its length is 330 meters. The creature rises 112 meters above the ground. For some reason, Godzilla is heading again towards Tokyo, and she will reach the capital in just 3 hours. Hit it straight. Risky, there could be a huge release of radiation. But since Yoguchi's plan is still in preparation, it was decided to stop the monster by any means. Fighter planes and combat helicopters were lifted into the sky, were deployed, tanks and artillery. You need to hit the legs and head to minimize the risk of radiation release. They started firing machine guns at the head, but the monster didn't even notice it. Then they connected a 30mm gun. The damage is 0 again. It's time to use the missile systems. Even despite dense urban development, all missiles hit the target. But when the cloud of smoke cleared, people saw that the monster's head was absolutely intact. His skin is too thick. Then they started shooting at Godzilla's legs with dozens of tanks. They were joined by artillery. Massive shelling seams began to slow down the monster. The huge body was covered in flashes from exploding shells. At some point the monster stopped. The attack does not stop for a second. The next stage of the Godzilla bombing operation. Powerful bombs were dropped on the head and body of the monster. Godzilla began to change his course. The overjoyed military repeated the airstrike. Suddenly a huge piece of the bridge flew towards the tanks. After all, the military made a mistake. All ammunition was used up. And the monster has already approached the border of Tokyo. The command post was destroyed, and the line of defense is broken. The operation was stopped because no further people were evacuated. A living mountain moves through the night Tokyo, destroying one area after another. American bombers are approaching the capital. Only they can cause even more damage than Godzilla himself. The stampede began. People try to hide in the subway before the bombing began. The Prime Minister will also have to evacuate. His residence is located on Godzilla's route. Soon on your back, 2 anti-bunker bombs fell from the monster. The street was flooded with liters of blood. After that, Godzilla began to glow brightly. Eyes closed with a protective membrane. The mouth opened as wide as possible. And a fiery table of flames erupted from it, destroying everything around. The fire changed to an atomic beam, with which the monster shot down the plane. And during the next air raid, the ridges on Godzilla's back are lowered into photonic rays. They used them to detonate the bombs they dropped, and the bombers themselves. The rays burned through dozens of houses and destroyed the helicopter where the Prime Minister was, Minister and other senior officials. 3 large areas of Tokyo were burned in a matter of seconds. Having coped, the monster froze in place. Now the main problem is the highest level of radiation, which she left behind. 1 million people were left homeless. I don't have enough strength, no resources, to eliminate the consequences of a night attack. One of the few surviving officials was a minister. Agriculture. He was appointed to the new prime ministers. Although grandfather is more concerned about the sofa noodles on his plate, meanwhile private companies working on blood-clotting drugs. The military obtained living Godzilla cells and sent them to laboratories. Scientists have found out that she reproduces asexually and is capable of colonizing the entire planet in a short time. Minister of Defense, after consulting with the Pentagon, proposes to destroy Godzilla with thermonuclear bomb. That is the USA base plans to drop an atomic bomb on Japan. This time to the capital. Nothing depends on the Japanese themselves anymore. Now he decides what he does with Godzilla. However, Yoguchi and his team still hoping for their freezing plan. They have very little time left. Many chemical companies have increased production coagulants for this mission. In the same time, scientists have calculated that the energy charge of the beam Godzilla will fully recover within 15 days. A rocket with a thermonuclear charge will be fired, even if one of the 1 million inhabitants won't have time to evacuate. I got the latest research to the Gucci team. Professor Goromoki. However, no one can decipher the complex scheme, which was left by a brilliant scientist, until it was folded like origami. So the team understood, how does a monster's body work? And produces nuclear energy. In fact, everything turned out to be very simple. It's not all about the cell membrane in extremophilic configuration, which inhibit activity with cellular brains. This inhibitor will help maintain coagulant efficiency. Yoguchi's plan can begin. However, they need 3 more days for production, the required amount of coagulants, and plans to strike in 2 days. Thanks Kyoko, Americans agreed to move the date by 1 day and take part in the operation. Barrels with inhibitors and coagulants were shipped. Drugs were poured into tanks. Everyone who will participate in the operation likely to be exposed to radiation. But only they have a chance to save Japan from destruction. The first stage is to attack Godzilla's legs with trains stuffed with explosives. Second stage attack with air drones. The monster woke up and made salvos with photonic rays. The military is going to exhaust Godzilla as much as possible. Attacks continue one after another. and the rays demolish nearby houses. The charge in the ridges is over. Then Godzilla connected his mouth with his tail. But soon the monster was left without this weapon. The next stage of blowing up skyscrapers, which will fall directly on Godzilla. One after another skyscraper collapses on the monster, covering him with his wreckage. Construction cranes approached the fallen creature. Tanks with coagulants were delivered, which began to be poured straight into the huge mouth. Suddenly Godzilla came to life and destroyed it in a second. All equipment and people with your beam. But the drug still worked. Godzilla slows down. Trains were sent to her feet again. With explosives. A powerful explosion knocked out the monster. And it came to life. Second and third crane platoons. They started pouring freezing agents into his mouth again. Drugs. Dozens of tanks are emptied per minute. Godzilla's skin began to harden. The tail fell limply onto the asphalt. But then the monster stood up again. However, only for this purpose, to freeze, in a more epic pose. Chest temperature dropped to minus 196 degrees. Godzilla, rendered harmless, in 2 to 3 years the radiation in the city will return to its previous level. Level now left. Rebuild Tokyo and choose a new government. Japan rose from ruins once and will do it again. We are again shown a frozen Godzilla on the tail, which managed to give rise to terrible humanoid monsters.